Or you can hear me? Oh, good. You think again we would have this all this zoomed down. So just was welcoming everyone, saying thank you for being here. We always worry whether or not you will show up for the second task force meeting, and we're grateful that you did. We have a lot of work ahead of us in a short period of time, and so I'll turn it over in just a second to our fearless leaders. But before I do that, just a couple of announcements to make. We do have minutes that will be coming out to you, so please make sure that you look over the minutes. And if you have feedback on those minutes, you could give those to our staff. We will clean those up. Deborah does her best to make sure she's capturing the conversation, but if we missed anything, please let us know. Also, your bios will be coming out to everyone so you can know who is on this great task force. And by the way, that would be a hint. If we don't have it, get it into us just as soon as you can, because we want to make sure that we represent everyone with that. With those bios will be a short one-question survey if we're hitting the mark. And you're welcome then to give us feedback. That will come out with your bios just as soon as we're done. And I'll have a few more remarks as we get ready to go into breakout sessions, but let's get this party started. So Brian and Ava, I'm going to turn it over to the two of you. And again, welcome everyone. We're grateful that you're here doing this work.
Thank you, Commissioner Watson. We are going to jump right into the meeting today and start with going over research on policies that have been created around the country regarding personal devices in school. So Peyton's going to take that away for us.
Okay, thank you, Ava. Like she said, I'm going to run us through some slides again this week to go over policy on cell phone policies that have happened in large districts or states around the country. So not all device policies are created equally. We've been seeing a lot of different versions of cell phone bans or cell phone policies, but that doesn't necessarily mean the same thing to everybody. And so we've seen a lot of different versions of these happen in Kansas and across the country. So just to kind of get us up to speed on some of the policies that we have been seeing, one example is bell to bell, and that might happen in a couple of different ways. Sometimes they're stored with the student, so either in something like the magnetic yonder pouches, so they're with the student but inaccessible, or in a backpack that the student carries with them that just has to be, so they just have to be out of sight. Or they might be stored separately from the student, so either they have to be in the student's lockers, or there are specifically designated phone lockers in the building, something like that. But either way, the idea of this policy would be that that the student is not using them from the time that they start school in the morning to when they leave in the afternoon. Another version of this is that cell phones are permitted only during certain times of the day. So during instructional time, they need to be away in whatever capacity that school decides, but they are allowed, for example, during a passing period or lunchtime. But then other than that, they would not be allowed. And then the other thing we've been seeing is that it's kind of up to the teacher's discretion what their policy might be. So some teachers might have some kind of caddy in their room that all students have to put their phones in. Some teachers might say, you can use your phone in my room during downtime. So some schools kind of leave it up to the individual teachers. So, kind of on the other side of this is that there have been several bills across the country that state legislatures have introduced to put some kind of restrictions on cell phones in schools. Here is a list of states that had bills introduced, but did not pass. So all of these states had something introduced in either the House or the Senate, saying that schools should ban or restrict cell phones in some way, but for one reason or another, it either didn't pass or wasn't signed by the governor. But there are other states that have had those happen more successfully. So we've had a few states where a law was passed or an executive order was signed by the governor to say that cell phones need to be prohibited in classrooms. So in Florida, this was the case. They passed a piece of legislation saying that that was what needed to happen. In Indiana, it was also a piece of legislation. And in Virginia, it was an executive order from their governor. Not only did Virginia give that executive order, though, they also put out this guidance document for schools to use, which I'm going to try to open up here and show you all. So this was just a good example that we wanted to bring up of what a guidance document might look like. If you can't see that, let me know. But this one is a draft coming out of Virginia right now. But they have these different sections with definitions, what is a cell phone free education, and then down here it gives recommendations. So they have split their recommendations up from elementary schools to middle schools and high school recommendations. So they've also got this really good section that I think speaks to a lot of parents' concerns on exemptions and emergency communications, which is, I think, where a lot of pushback seems to come from when people do have these policies in place. So as far as kind of a guidance document goes, we just wanted to highlight this one as an example to kind of look at. We will drop that link here in the chat just so everybody can look at that later if they want to. And then these slides are going to be posted on the web page, which you all have access to as well. So if anyone wants to go take a look at that, they're more than welcome to. And then we have states that have had the state board put out some sort of guidance encouraging districts to limit cell phone use, but it's non-binding. So that last slide was talking about states that had passed a law that required schools to do something. These states have had their state boards of education put out some sort of thing saying the state board of education thinks that school districts should do X policy. And then they put those out there for schools to use. And then this one is similar to the last one, but it's a law that either encourages or requires districts to adopt a policy. So in California, they passed a law that encourages school districts to adopt a cell phone policy, whereas in Ohio, there was a law passed that requires school districts to adopt a policy, but it doesn't necessarily say what that policy has to be. And then that is all I have for the research for this week. So I will go ahead and open it up for questions if anybody has those. We'll do the same raise hand kind of protocol that we did last week, and Ava's gonna call you out if you have any questions about those other policies.
Before you guys answer questions, we did have some comments in the chat. Um, Chase mentioned the California legislation that was passed, if you want to take a look at that as well. And if you have any other questions, you can ask Peyton. Personally, I think one of my questions would probably be like how these different schools, like, do they have to purchase the like bags on their own, or does the state provide them with that if they pass a law, or the Board of Education, or kind of how does that work?
Yeah, so that has really varied from state to state. There have been examples where the legislature has said uh, schools have to ban phones, and they'll allocate some sort of money as like a grant or a stipend to any school that wants to use the Yonder bags. I have seen that sort of policy. Other ones are just saying you have to have a policy, but not necessarily what that policy has to be. So then if the schools wanted that policy to include Yonder bags, it would be on the district to purchase those.
Okay, one other question I have, Peyton, real quick, is I know Kansas was on the list of states that had proposed legislation. Do you know Bielefeld, who is the superintendent from USD 259 in Wichita? Kara Ballou, who is a U.S. history and government teacher at USD 385 in Andover? And Brent Wolf, who is a principal at USD 260 in Derby. We'll have each of you talk a little bit about your background, tell us a little bit about your schools and your policies, and kind of how those policies are implemented. Brent, will you go ahead and get us started with this, please?
Yeah, I'm Brent Wolf. I'm the principal at an elementary school, so my perspective may probably be much different than the high school, Kara, and the superintendent of Wichita. But I also have taught middle school, and I have two teenagers at home, so there's a little bit of that. But we do not have a problem with cell phones at Derby Hills Elementary School. That doesn't mean that we don't have cell phones, but many of the students that have them are required, all of the students that have them are required to have them in their backpack or their locker throughout the day. And we haven't had, in the 5 years that I've been principal, we have not had any parent complaints or community complaints or discipline issues. Granted, I work with kids that are 3 through 11, but we haven't had any discipline or community backlash from cell phones at Derby Hills. Was that the question you wanted me to answer, Brian?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Brent. Kelly, would you go ahead and kind of share a little bit about the policies and practices in Wichita for us, please?
Sure. Kelly Bielefeld, Superintendent, Wichita Public Schools. Uh, if we don't know, largest school district in the state, so we have 9 different high schools and 18 different middle schools, and so consistency on any policy is obviously challenging when you're talking about that kind of volume. Last year, at the beginning of the year, when I took over the board, revised the policy to, especially at the middle school level, to move away from kind of a building-based decision to, phones are supposed to be in lockers during the school day. They can bring them to school, leave them locked up, and then take them home with them at the end of the day. High schools, then, academic time was supposed to be restricted, except for passing periods of lunch, etc. Obviously, post-COVID, all of the we were 1-to-1 across the district and you doing everything on technology. So it's a challenging habit to break for kids for all sorts of reasons. Like Brent said, I'm a parent of early young adults, 2 high school kids, a middle school kid, and so know some of the challenges, some of the distractions, some of the issues with social media, and some of that too. So the one thing I would add in that we added in our board policy that is relevant, I think, to the discussion is about how during passing period, students recording videos of kids fighting and then posting those videos. And it's interesting to me that, you share violent videos of minors doing violent things with one another. And it's not really thought of as a thing, as opposed to if it's inappropriate in a sexual way, it's, illegal in every way, shape, and form all across the nation. So it's really not appropriate for people online to be sharing violence against minors in any way. And so we did kind of crack down on that. It's a natural occurrence for a high school kid to pull out a phone when they see something crazy going on. But that only adds to the disruption and adds to the chaos and adds to everything else that can unfortunately happen in a high school setting. So we also took that step. I would say enforcement's been, a mixed bag. A lot of teachers appreciate the policy having their back. But I wouldn't say we're, 100% consistent in the way we administer that policy, at least a year into the change.
Thank you, Kelly. I really appreciate you sharing there. Kara, would you go ahead and kind of share a little bit of your experiences, please?
Certainly. So I'm Kara Ballou. I teach at Andover Central High School. We have 2 high schools in Andover. And our high school policy is at teacher discretion. Our middle school policy is no phones. They should be in lockers and things like that. So it sounds like it's a bit consistent. My personal experience in the classroom with the phones, I would say I would agree with Kelly in that it's worse after COVID. We talk a lot about the chemical reaction that happens when you pick up that phone in terms of your own body because of, the way that you react to it. When I taught at Marshall Middle School for a while, and I explained to my students that they're giving up their Fifth Amendment rights of testifying against themselves when they videotape things and then they post them on a public site. I'm like, come on, you can do better. And I tell my high school kids that. But I find them kind of there's 2 sides to it. They can be really helpful in helping a kid focus. I recently purchased some iPods. It's amazing to me how much I can focus. I get it. I also understand that I don't want them in when I'm talking, when they're working with a group, when they are, supposed to be taking a quiz or a test or something like that. And so I find that every single hour I have to say, put your phone in your bag, because they are allowed in the passing periods, and they kind of push that. We do have some teachers who say none at all, and you're going to stand outside the room until you get done with your phone and then you can enter. It is a power struggle when you ask a child or a student to give you their phone. It's like, you've asked them to give them, your foot or their hand or something or else. And I understand that. It's a whole lot more than a phone. It's not just a little flip phone kind of a thing. I would just a little bit of a shout out for your Justin Castle, I believe it is, at PV Middle. A friend of mine teaches there, and she said that policy of absolutely no phones has made a huge difference there. And so, I've talked to several people. I am working on a doctorate, and part of that is social media and generations. And I have seen a huge impact. This morning, in fact, I had a young lady get a text right as she was walking into my class. It was a dual credit government class through Butler County. And it took a good 5 minutes for me to get the class redirected because it had been something that offended her. And she just wasn't going to stop talking about it. And I'm like, no, look. But finally, I pulled out the assignment we were doing, which is pretty complicated. And I said, look, this is what we got to get done today. And they were like, oh, okay. I mean, and these are conscientious students, but to pull their attention away from that phone is, it's hard, and I told a few of my students that I was going to talk tonight. And of course they were like, tell them not to do it. And I said, no, that is not my job. My job is telling them what's going on. But they were concerned about being able to call their parent in a crisis. And, we had what was it? A calcium spill, I think it was. maybe that was, it might not be right. Anyway, we had a chemical spill in a chem lab, could have blown off the back of our building. So we evacuated to the football stadium. And but as I told my principal I was doing, she said it caused chaos. All of those phones, all of those stories going out, parents panicking, and justifiably, I mean, it was an emergency. I'm not saying parents shouldn't be concerned about their kids, but when you're trying to direct one message and then you've got 800 going out, it definitely complicates things. And I have found in the past 2 years, I have been I started teaching, you can tell by my color here that I started teaching before all of this was going on and before we had Google Classroom, et cetera. And find myself reversing, taking things off of Google Classroom, off of Canvas, because kids think they can stay home and do whatever they need to do and they don't have to be in my class. And I feel like I was hired for a reason. And so I'm pulling things off. I'm doing more with paper and pen. A lot of studies are saying that is more effective. And I don't doubt it. I always kind of believe that to start with. But, anecdotally, it's nice to see the research kind of getting caught up. And so that is kind of, we don't have a policy at elementary level in Andover. I talked to the communications guy and Perry said we didn't have one. So, that my role of enforcement, to kind of go through Peyton's list here, is I can enforce it how I want to in my classroom. And then I just make it clear. And kids ask, can I listen to my headphones? Yes, that's fine if they're working on their own. And so I try to delineate, but it's tough. And I see the impact of that, social media in particular, daily. And it can be hard to compete with that for some attention in the classroom.
So Brian, I'd jump in and add a couple things because I think a lot of what Kara said it was great.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
I think the privacy aspect is one that doesn't get talked about enough. When every kid has a camera and a video, that when I send my kid to school, I have an expectation of a parent that kid isn't going to have, their feet under the bathroom stall posted on Instagram or whatever craziness happens. And they are an invasion of a lot of students' privacy in a lot of ways. And that's an aspect of this that I don't think we think about or talk about enough. The other thing is, and that's one of the first things you hear, especially people probably my generation that kind of knew a world without cell phones and grow up, and now we have them. Is parents want they want their kids to have a phone in case of emergency. But if you really stop to think about it as a parent, if there's an actual emergency, the last thing I want my kid doing is worrying about their phone. They should be listening to the teacher so the teacher can keep them safe. So does the phone really make my kid less or more safe? No, it may give me a sense of security that I can know how they're doing if something happens. But the reality is probably the worst thing you could do in an emergency if you're a student is be worrying about your phone or texting and not paying attention to what's going on. So I know that's kind of a normal thing that we hear in schools, but I think the reality is just the opposite. That I don't think cell phones keep kids safer. They may give us more apparent security and make us feel better, but it actually may put kids in more danger depending on the situation. And I think Kara's example was a perfect one.
Thank you, guys. We want to make sure we prioritize Q&A this week. So I will start by asking whether you believe your school or district policy on cell phones has been effective and why or why not.
I can go first. I also was a Board of Education member for 8 years during COVID and 3 bond issues and 4 superintendents. So my stress level is a-okay, but I'm no longer on the board. Bless their hearts. But during that time, one of the things that the high school was working on was banning cell phones, and it took a lot of resistance and a lot of struggle. And they were toward the beginning of the movement in that area. And so there were a lot of parents, like Kelly said, that wanted 24-hour, 7 days a week access to their child. And so then they made it kind of like Kara's school, where the teacher could have the control over the classroom. But what they were finding was the newest, stereotypically newer teachers were having the most trouble managing it because they didn't have a lot of those courses or management strategies taught to them in college. But I think a piece of the puzzle that I'm thankful for your task force for tackling will be that while it is a school problem and opportunity at the same time, it's also a parent piece, and that's a huge piece to this puzzle. We can say this is going to happen at school, this is going to happen at school, and this is going to happen at school, but we cannot control as much as we want to the parents outside of those walls, and a policy is only as good as how it is enforced. And so it's going to be an uphill battle. It's not one that's not worth it for sure. But just in my little town where I live, the resistance was great from parents because of the fear of having their kid not be able to access them at a moment's notice. They tried to do this lunchroom in the hallways, but kids would ask to go to the bathroom or go to their locker often so they could go check their messages, and the reliance on that from the students was very, very high. And then the last thing I want to say for implementation or the policy
to see what they want for dinner, but that is allowing an opening for them to check the 200 other notifications that they're receiving. So I think it would be good to evaluate what the school's role is in educating parents to understand not only what's happening, but also the research. And the research is very clear on the disruptions that phones are causing. So I agree with you on the child development and the education piece. I did have a question earlier. I know at the elementary level, phones haven't been a concern for you yet, but I'm curious about smartwatches because I've heard we have sixth grade in Shawnee Mission in elementary, and the sixth grade teachers have really had struggles with smartwatches. So when I define phones, I actually include watches and AirPods and other things. So I'm curious if that's an issue.
Yeah, smartwatches we feel are just like cell phones. You can call on them, you can text on them, you can get notifications on them. Even though they're called watches, they do tell time, but unfortunately, I don't think they're used for telling time more often than not. So yeah, we use the same blanket statement that it's great that you got an Apple Watch for Christmas, but its house will be in your backpack until the end of the day.
Thank you.
Kim, I was actually a little bit surprised that our policies, I was looking through them knowing I was coming this evening, and they don't say anything about Apple Watches. It's written broadly enough that you can interpret that, but the actual like smartwatch is not in there yet. So that may be something I take back and say, might want to think about that. So.
Okay, I think up next is Erica.
Hi, sorry everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Sorry I'm off camera. I'm actually out of state at a conference today. And it's a little wild kind of behind me, so it's probably less, speaking of distraction, less distracting if I'm off camera. I wanted to chime in on a couple thoughts. I think there is a lot to talk about, obviously, on this topic. I have to say though, I think it's become sensitive to talk about trust me, we're the experts. So if I may, respectfully push back on that concept that educators are the experts on all things kids in classrooms. Frankly, parents are the experts on their children, and that would extend into the doctor's office. And that would extend for yourself into the doctor's office. You're the expert on your body. Now, does that mean you go and do your own surgery? Like, no, you don't. But at the end of the day, you need to get as much information as possible. And you ultimately are responsible for decisions for yourself. And when you have minor children, that is also true. So if we're talking about kind of pulling the expert card, parents are the experts on their children and their individual children. And so when we keep in mind that we create policies, which we need to have, that won't necessarily, that policy, whatever policy is there, may not necessarily be right for each individual child. And I know that's not necessarily, what the goal is. That may not be realistic. But I'd like to push back on that. I also would like to suggest that I'm not sure we're taking enough time perhaps to discuss, and maybe that's just what we haven't gotten to yet. But I'd like to make sure there's enough time to really discuss specifics around why cell phones are a safety device for young people in schools. Obviously, they can definitely be a distraction. They can be a distraction at all kinds of times. Our kids are struggling with academic proficiency a lot in the state of Kansas, in Johnson County, where I am, even in Blue Valley, where I am. So I think it's important that we look at things like this. But, if we come into this with the idea that the goal is to ban cell phones, and that we're then backing our way into that, I think we're missing an opportunity. I know no one's saying that outright, but even in the language that was used and described earlier when reviewing policies from other districts and other cities and things like that, describing even legislation discussion, describing that legislation wasn't successful if it didn't pass a cell phone ban. And I may be paraphrasing incorrectly, and if I am, someone please correct me, but that was what I heard. So I'd like to toss those things out to the group for consideration. We have some incredible educators, we have some incredible schools, and those districts and schools, many of those have made some pretty incredibly big mistakes. So I think it's fair to say that, a kind of blank check and pull the expert card is not really going to cut it anymore. I think Kim made a great point about administrations and transparency with parents. And I think that's very, very important, especially given what I just said, right? Transparency and accountability lead to trust, and more versus the other way around. So just some food for thought in our hearty discussions here.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Erica. I'm not saying that we are the one all be all holders of all information, but we are one of the experts in a child and one of the advocates for a child in their schooling and their learning. And but yes, we cannot do it alone, and we are not the most important in their life, but I do believe our voice matters. And so I will apologize for saying that or inferring that we are the experts. We are just one of the pieces to the many pieces that help kids develop.
I appreciate that. And of course, your voices matter, of course. Just like in your doctor example, right? The doctor's voice matters, right? That's why, but people do get second opinions and third opinions and that type of thing. So I super appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Sue, what questions do you have for our panelists?
I was going to ask the superintendent in Wichita, have you had this ban in place for a year already? And have you looked at the academic data within the buildings that are doing a good job with regulating the phone use? And then my second part is, are you continuing the citizenship around the use of cell phones, not just at school, but in all types of areas? So did you beef up any of the citizenship knowledge around cell phones and technology as you put these, I'm not sure you call it a ban in your district, but a restriction on cell phones in the classroom?
Yeah, great question. To answer the first one, I do think, our academic data as a district is up, the middle school level is up from the prior year. I don't know that I would hang my hat on that being solely because of this policy. We have not analyzed it to the level of, which middle schools have really implemented this policy well. I know, PV Middle School, Pleasant Valley Middle School was mentioned, and I do know that their scores have jumped the last 2 years quite a bit. So whether that's leadership correlation, I don't know, because we haven't analyzed it to that level. But I do think in every way, right, whether it's intercom calls from the office or fire drills or all interruptions disrupt the instructional time, right? Like any interruption in the instructional time breaks concentration and makes it hard for kids to learn. So whether it's a cell phone or something else, protecting instructional time was something I always believed in as a principal, and not having assemblies during our core blocks and all that kind of stuff. Cell phones are just one piece of that. We have done at the middle school level, and this really wasn't because of the policy, but just in conjunction with it. That all of our middle schools, hopefully by this year, we'll have every middle school that's Common Sense Media certified, which is kind of our approach to making sure kids have some digital literacy skills. They have some information literacy skills about fake news and how to approach that, cyberbullying, social media management, all that kind of stuff. So that's a nationwide program. I don't know if it's come up in any of you guys' discussions yet so far, but we don't have that at the high school level yet. But by the end of this year, we should have every middle school certified in that, which is one way we can have that kind of social emotional piece of using a cell phone and how that all works. So,
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, thank you. Amy, I believe you're next.
Thanks. I've got my Marshall Middle School shirt on, and then I have my Andover letter jacket over here because I graduated from Andover, and I drive through Derby sometimes. So this panel was like selected for me. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. So one of the things that I was making notes on is kind of looking through. I think Brent, you made phone or air quotes around saying phone bans, and I've heard the word phone ban come through a lot. And thinking through some of policy changes that have gone on in public areas in the past, we don't necessarily say gun bans. If you're at school, it's a gun-free zone, or if you're out at a restaurant, it might be a smoke-free zone. And I wonder, as we look at this topic and try to redirect towards if we have schools going phone-free, for hopefully bell to bell, because that seems to be kind of the cream of the crop, like shows the most benefits for schools if you do first bell to last bell policies. But going phone free, what comes up when you do kind of a risk benefit analysis of we take phones out of the hallways, we get sorry, my kids are home, we get this back. So I'm thinking like social skills, kind of the free play of socializing in a hallway in a lunchroom, what would be the tipping point that would get schools in Wichita and surrounding areas to go phone free for those extra bits of the day?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think there's research that shows the benefits. We all know some of the benefits. Um, the teacher was talking about the power struggle that can be created through phones, and so I think that's one of the challenges that we have, even as a parent, right? Um, take a phone for a weekend from your kid. Whew, that's the consequence, of all consequences. So, um, but I do think that doesn't mean it's not worth it. I mean, I think most administrators, I know we have administrators on the call here, who were administrators before cell phones, or even particularly social media. I would say more than cell phones, that, if I could ban social media, I would, right? Like, they cause and create so much other disruption to the day. As in, Kara talked about the drama that the girl brought into the classroom, but all the bullying that happens, all the other distractions that happen, the rumors that get spread, all of that kind of stuff. I think it's hard to quantify. It's hard to put that, that there's a number to that. But I do think, in a lot of the middle school spaces where we don't allow phones during lunch anymore, there's a lot more interaction between kids and creating those social skills that we know are vitally important. And I don't think there's much of a downside to that, at least from what I've heard from administrators. There's maybe a louder lunchroom, but it's not as though kids are doing other, negative, antisocial things during that time. It's really, for the most part, been positive. So,
Do you think that with Kara and just a continuation on that, with the Jonathan Haidt book talking about creating new social norms, is that something that can be brought through and make that more successful? That's my final question. Thank you, guys.
Well, if that was addressed to me, I haven't read the Jonathan Haidt book. Actually, I really hope our district acts and does something there, etc. So I can't, it's on my list, but I haven't quite gotten there. When we talk about transparency, and I do think, kids are an amazing humans, and it does take, this whole, like, it takes parents and it takes school and it takes aunts and uncles and faith traditions, etc., to build kids. And so if we look, I like your focus on a phone-free zone. I think that's a much better way to look at it. And but I think that parents, when we're talking about digital literacy, we have all these adults that weren't in school that we could teach, and they just kind of learned to use that phone as they were living through life. And I think that sometimes parents don't think about what their kid might be doing when they text them, because it's just so easy. It's my kid. It's no big deal. It's a cell phone. I always text my kid. It's not a problem. But my principal was telling me that, we had a parent, and I'm sure that, the intentions were all positive, and just was in trauma herself but she texted her daughter in the middle of a math class and said her aunt had died. And I'm like, whoa, time out. Wow. Nothing, no learning happened in that classroom from then on for anybody, let alone, including that child who's now in a crisis. And, you, as a teacher, your focus is on that kid. Like, everybody else can take care of themselves. Now you got to, you just got to take care of that one, because that's a horrible thing to have happen to a student. And you want to make sure you're there for them. And, I'm like, time out. If you had let me know, and I could have broke it to him a little, softer. We have counselors, we have social workers, all kinds of support systems in place that, just kind of got zipped through there. And I would honestly say, I don't think the parent really thought about it. Just, here's what happened, and I was just sharing it. But the ripple effect through that classroom, I'm sure was, hard. So, I think that it's a society thing that we need to really think about, and Erica brought up kind of that whole role of the phone, and how can we look at it in the school, and how it's affecting everything, et cetera. And I think that that's a really good point, in that, but we need to look at the whole big picture of, why are we why is a boss communicating with my seniors to tell them what their schedule is? I'm like, your emergency, your lack of planning is not an emergency on my part. In terms of you can't, you want this kid at work at 3:45 instead of 4 o'clock. Like, time out. Let's set some like expectations here for, and kind of think about where kids are and why that phone's being used, what the repercussions are, and some things like that. Because, yeah, it's just a little innocent text. I want to know if they want pizza or chicken wings for dinner. But, the other 200 notifications, as I believe Kim brought up, also get checked when that happens. And then we have a classroom discussion, So I think there's a lot. I agree that with a lot of people, there's this whole big holistic thing going on here. And I'm really grateful for the people who've chosen to be a part of this task force, because I think it's a really important discussion. And I think it was a real act of leadership to step up and be a part of it.
Thank you, Kara. I think next up we have Jose.
Hi, like I said, I'm Jose Martinez from Hamilton Middle School in USD 259 also. I think Erica and Kara, you kind of touched up on it. It kind of once you guys started talking, Erica, primarily, I started thinking of a scenario that happened earlier this week. Most of you guys know that Wichita Public Schools closed down schools last year. One of the schools that I work in Hamilton, so we are a welcoming school. The first few weeks, can you guys hear me? Okay.
Yes.
It keeps cutting in and out. So first few weeks, they've been rough because we don't have relationships with the students we're welcoming in. Parent came in, I'm like, hey, your daughter's been using her phone in class. And the parent started telling me, I don't know you. I don't have relationships with you. I don't know if I trust you. It's more scenario based of what Erica was talking. And it goes back to kind of the basics of education, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Why does the parent feel like that? Do they feel that their kids are safe in school? Is this just echoing kind of nationally what's going on? There's gun violence in schools. There is threats to schools. There is bullying, cyberbullying. Are parents accepting that and taking that internally and saying, hey, one of the basic points of Maslow's is safety? Is that phone just an effect? Is just a way that, kind of like Erica said, is it something that will provide that mesh? But we're not really answering, and this is what Kara, we're not really going to the root cause of why do parents and students feel that phones are a need in school? Not just like what are kids doing? I'm not talking about that part, but why do parents feel that it is okay that kids have that phone? And it's a lot of it has to do with safety, but the parent ultimately is telling me, hey, I want my kid to have that phone because I don't know if I trust you. I don't know if I trust his school. This is new to me. This is new to my kid. I want my kid to be able to tell me what is going on, if they're in trouble. That talked a lot to me. We need to build relationships. We need to provide safety, but it's all, if you get to the root cause, it's a lot of social emotional. It started unwinding with COVID, and it just keeps going and going. And I think the phones, kind of when I talked about, I don't know if it was group or when we broke up into groups last week, kind of how ADHD gets masked with some of the kids when they're using technology. What are phones also masking some issues, that social emotional needs that students are having? Or if we take those phones away, if we take access to, that safety net that they're providing, are we going to need more social aid in school?
Okay, really good points, Jose. Thank you for sharing. Up next, I believe, Ananya, do you have any questions for our presenters?
Yeah. So, I was like wondering how flexible are these existing policies in your school? I know in my school there are kids like who are in ESL who depend on technologies to like learn better, and teachers have been saying there is a lack of clarity on how those students are using their phones in class, and some kids are like struggling because they don't have their phones to translate. So kind of how do you ensure flexibility slash like all teachers being on the same page with what these policies look like?
I think it's a great point, and I do think, I mean, as with any policy, right, it isn't a one size fits all. Um, I do think if for our district, we're one-to-one devices for all of our kids from 6th to 12th grade. So that used to be there, it's easier to pull my phone out and use it as a calculator, use it as a whatever, because I didn't have a device. Now that kids have a device that's on a secure network that we have some control and some protections on, I think we prefer kids to use that. Depending on the situation, there's adaptive technology for kids with disabilities. We have 112 different languages in Wichita Public Schools, so we cannot have translation services for every single kid all the time. So I think it's a great point that some of those technology tools, which can be used in a phone, are needed at times. But it can be a slippery slope, right? With you let one kid do it, and they feel it's unfair that that kid gets it and I don't. But I think our teachers are pretty wise and flexible at how to mitigate those issues. So I wouldn't say it's it's 100% anywhere. The way most of our policies are not 100%, and probably shouldn't be.
That's a really good point. And I generally have, when I have students who need to use that phone for translation, then I will have a chat with them and say, look, I'm going to trust you, and you need to, follow what I'm asking, that you're not checking your Instagram, that you're not doing the various other things, you're using it for translation. And that usually takes care of it individually for me. And but I think Jose had a really good point. That's because that's the beginning of the relationship of, it's kind of one of those little testing the waters kind of a thing. And you can kind of figure out whether or not they're going to follow through or not pretty quickly after that. But most of the students who I have given kind of more of an exception to, but I'm dealing with juniors and seniors. So, they're a lot more mature and receptive of those types of trust and relationships and things like that. So that's definitely kind of, keep that in mind, that I do have an opportunity to teach juniors and seniors.
Okay, thank you, Kara. We have time for about one more question, so we're going to let Chase pose his question here in a moment. If we haven't got to you for your questions, if you would go ahead and leave those in the group chat, we'll make sure that we get those addressed. So Chase, we'll go ahead and open this up to you, and then again, we'll move on to our breakout rooms.
Thank you to all the panelists for your insight and your perspective. I really appreciate it. I've read more articles on this issue than I can count, and I've read through a lot of testimony on this issue more than I can count. And Kara, I thought you brought up some points that I haven't heard yet. So I just want to thank you for sharing those pieces of information to the whole group. My question, I guess, is do any of your schools use Yonder bags? I mean, that's a conversation I've been reading as a tool to enforce the rules that have been effective. And then I've read in some articles that have not been effective. Apparently kids are able to buy magnets or something that can unlock the bag. And so I'm just curious in terms of enforcement, because I strongly believe at the state level, we want to help the schools be be able to enforce this. And so if, yonder bags is the best route, but they do look expensive based on my research, I'm happy to support grants to schools who are willing to help enforce the rules. And if this is a great tool to do so, I'm all for it. But I'm just curious if your school districts use yonder bags and if they're effective.
We do not use yonder bags, but my kids know what they are and they have some opinions.
I do think it is an important point though, because when these are, it's not like you're taking, a candy bar from a kid that's not supposed to have it. That's worth 50 cents. I mean, these are $1,000 devices. And so there is a liability, if you take a phone and it gets stolen or something happens to it, gets dropped. So I think thinking of preventative, like how would this look, and to lock them up or whatever it is, whether that's a solution or something else, it's something that has to be part of the conversation, is the cost of those devices, because I don't think families, we as a principal, you have to treat it really, really carefully because of how expensive some of them are.
Derby, I have not heard of yonder bags, but it does beg the question that I think that the more information all of these stakeholders have, I think the better. And one, I think, group of stakeholders that we, especially in elementary school, sometimes fail to chime in is the students. I mean, how powerful would it be for students to know about the Child Internet Protection Act? How powerful would it be for middle schoolers to know laws about privacy? How powerful would it be for high school students to know, or even probably before that, social media constructs and local laws focused around those, not to scare anybody at all, but to give them the information that they need. So when they have conversations with their parents on other pieces of this puzzle that are helping them and to grow into great people, they will be able to hopefully lay out what all of the information that they have received.
Brent, I think it's a great point, and I know we're out of time, but even we equated this to a smoke-free zone or whatever. If you think of this as a public health issue, education has to be a piece of the solution, right? Like we have smoke-free zones, but people don't smoke not just because there's a smoke-free zone, but because they know about the negative health implications of that. People wear seatbelts now; they didn't used to wear seatbelts. Part of that is it's against the law, true, but they also know that there's dangers about doing it. I think an educational piece, what are the dangers of this for your kid, whether they're 3 years old or 13 years old or 23 years old? I think that's got to be a part of the conversation, part of the solution that hopefully you all come up with.
All right. We'd like to really thank our panelists for taking time to speak with us today. I know you guys are busy, and we really appreciate you guys all sharing your expertise. I know I definitely took away some interesting insights from you. We're going to move on to breakout room discussions, and into these, we're going to talk about the policies a little bit more in depth. We're going to place you in breakout rooms and want the discussions to really focus on what a potential cell phone or personal advice policy could look like at the state level. Before we transition to these, we're going to switch back to Dr. Watson real quick so he can spend a little time just kind of sharing what the state board's role in this would be in terms of what we can and can't do with guidance. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Dr. Watson real quick.
Thank you. And again, thanks for a lively discussion.
Okay, it looks like we've just about got everybody back from breakout rooms. We're going to have our note takers from KSDE compile all the suggestions and the main points from the breakout room discussions, and those will be shared out back to us for our next group. So thank you for your contributions there. I'm going to turn it over to Ava.
Yeah, thank you guys all for being here again this week and for taking your time to focus on this issue for students. We will see you at our next meeting, which will be on September 5th. And that's when we'll kind of shift our focus to screen time and mental health. So thank you guys so much for coming.